Good afternoon and welcome to Allegion's presentation of the essentials of fire door inspections. My name is Jeff Tock. I've been in the hardware business for over 40 years. I started with Allegion January 2nd, 1985, so I have a lot of experience when it comes to doors, frames, and hardware. Let's get started. Here we have some general data here. This was provided to us by FEMA. In 2018, 30% of the fires that occurred in the residential market, 9% non-residential, that'd be typically commercial buildings. The largest number would be outside, over 40%. So I think that would be our forest fires, brush fires that seem to plague the West primarily. Top residential building fire causes in 2018, look at that, 50.7% occurred from cooking. So be careful when you're in the kitchen. Top non-residential building fire causes, look again. Number one cause, cooking. I assume that's in the restaurants when they don't clean their exhaust hoods and that grease builds up in there and eventually catches fire. So our agenda for this session, we're going to define what a fire door assembly really is. We're going to look at the 13 items per NFPA 80 that need to be inspected. Then we'll take a deep dive into those 13 items. We'll look at pictures. It'll help you understand what all of that means. And then finally, we'll talk about using a fire door inspection checklist. Let's start out and define a fire door assembly. Before we do that, I'd like you to take a look at this website if you've never been there before, idighardware.com. It is run by our very own Lori Green. Lori is a codes expert. People around the country rely on her for good information about doors and hardware. I would encourage you, if you are not signed up for updates, click on the sign up here button, add your name to the list, and then you too will get the wonderful information that Lori puts out every week. If you need to search for something, use the search box in the upper right corner on the screen there. For instance, if you want to know if there's any caulking compound that can be used in a fire door to plug holes, type fire door caulk in the search window, click the magnifying glass, and it will take you to every article where Lori has referenced that product. A very powerful search engine. So when we talk about a fire door, we're looking at the hinges that hang the door. We're looking at the frame. We're looking at the latching device. And finally, the item that will close that door so that the latch can do its job. So all of that, the door, frame, hinge, locking device, closer, are called an assembly. So when you hear somebody reference a fire door assembly, that's what they're talking about. Now we're going to watch a little video here. I'm going to ask you to pause this presentation, look down below in the title box, and you'll see a link down there for this video, Anatomy of a Fire Door. Watch that, and while you're watching it, see if you can answer these 4 questions. We'll come back when you're done and go through them. So number 1, fire door assemblies are also known as. Number 2, must all the products in a fire door assembly be tested by the same laboratory? Number 3, what do automatic closing doors do? And number 4, hinges for fire doors must be made of and have what? So go ahead and pause, go down below, click the link, and I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back. I hope you found that to be informative. So let's answer the questions. Fire door assemblies are also known as opening protectives. Must all the products in a fire door assembly be tested by the same laboratory? The answer is no. We have products that are tested by Underwriters Laboratory. We have doors and frames that may be tested by Warnock-Hersey, but they can all be combined into the same assembly. What do automatic closing doors do? Well, they close upon the detection of smoke. And number 4, hinges for fire doors must be made of steel and have ball bearings or a bearing of some type. Could also be a concealed oil light bearing, just so long as it's a bearing to keep that door moving smoothly. Now let's look at the 13 items that are inspected. Originally in 2007, when NFPA 80 first listed the requirements for annual fire door inspections, they had a list of 11 items to be inspected. Now, NFPA 80 is revised every 3 years, so in 2010, we still had 11 items to be inspected. In 2013, they added 2 items, and we'll look at what those 2 items were. One of them may be very surprising to you, was to me. In 2016, we're still at 13. 2019, we're still at 13. And the latest version, 2022, has just come out. And lo and behold, they did not add any more items to inspect. So take a minute, read these. I'm not going to read them to you. But take a minute and read through them, and then we will proceed on to look at them individually. So many of you may have been in the business for a while, and a lot of these are familiar to you. Let's go ahead and look at them very closely. Labels are present and legible. Why is that important? Well, they have information on the labels that tells us what to look for on the opening. Number one is the time rating, but it's also going to talk about the hardware that's required. Things like minimum latch throw, 1/2 inch for singles, 3/4 inch for pairs. Why do we need to inspect for this? Well, over time, openings have changed. Owners may have changed hardware on the doors, and it may not be the correct hardware based on the way the door and frame were tested. And oftentimes, doors and frames get painted, and the labels are painted over. So here we have examples of 3 labels. The one on the left is a Warnock Hershey label, not to be confused with Hershey, the candy company. It's Hershey. This is for a company by the name of VT Industries. Notice I'm turning my head sideways because of the way that label is printed. I have to turn sideways to read it. And it tells me that it is a 3/4 hour rating, minimum latch throw, 1/2 inch. We can install this as a single door or in pairs, including double egress. So we would want to examine that opening and make sure it falls into that category. I did see a pair of doors one time in a nursing facility where it said clearly on the label not to be hung in pairs, and those doors were hung as a pair of doors. So somebody didn't read the label. Down below that, the red label gives us more information. It says this fire door must be installed with approved or listed surface-mounted hardware. Any other hardware shall void the label. So that's the indication that it is okay to use fire exit hardware on this door, as long as it's fire rated. The second label we see is a label that you would find on the frame. It is Underwriter's Laboratory, fire door frame, and it gives you a number, and then it tells us who the manufacturer is. This happens to be manufactured by Curry's, one of our competitors. It doesn't give us any time listing. Oftentimes, frames are just simply rated or not rated. Some of the pre-finished frames that we see by Ready Frame are timely. Some of those will have a specific time rating on them, but standard hollow metal frames typically are either rated or not rated. The third label there is listed 3-hour maximum fire door frame, and that's from Steelcraft. That's our company. So in this case, we did give you a specific time rating on that frame. Also tells us that if it's to be used as a smoke door frame, it would require listed gasketing. And this last label that we see is not good because it's been painted over. So again, this would be a frame label that was painted. It is metal. You could, if you were careful, scrape the paint off or use a solvent to clean it off to find out what information is on that label. When you see door labels that are Mylar, like the third label that we see in the series there, if that label were to be painted over and then somebody tried to clean it off, it would change that label to read void, at which point you would need to purchase new doors or frames with the proper label on them. So always a good idea to instruct the painters to not paint the labels. No holes or breaks in the door or frame. Why is that important? Holes can allow smoke and or fire to pass through or into the door. If you've got a door that is filled with honeycomb core and that fire gets inside, it can ignite that core and then cause that door to fail prematurely. So why are we doing the inspection? Well, sometimes people leave mounting holes when they change hardware. So when you take down one manufacturer's door closer and put another manufacturer's closer up, they may not have the same hole pattern. So it's important to fill those holes per the manufacturer's instructions or using steel through bolts. So here's an example of a frame that I encountered in upstate New York. It was a hotel that had recently changed from one brand to another, and when they did that, they did some remodeling. And this particular door at one time had a rim exit device on it, and they removed that exit device and put a passage set on this door. It goes from the main lobby in the hotel into the stairwell and then right out to the back parking lot. So somebody determined that they didn't want or need an exit device anymore, so they did not fill the holes properly. They used caulking compound, and you can see that it shrunk. Those holes there are where the strike used to be. And then in order to accommodate the latch bolt on the passage set, they used some sort of a cutting instrument on the frame, dug the grout out, the concrete grout that was behind that frame, and now the door latches into that hole in the frame, which would not be a legal modification in the field. This would be another hotel. This was in Duluth, Minnesota. I was there doing training. We were down in the lowest level of the property, and if you were to exit out, you'd have to go back up the steps to get to the main lobby and leave. Well, many of the doors had an older style mortise device on there, and as those devices wore out, rather than buying a similar device to fit in the existing holes, they bought a less expensive device and just added it to the door without any thought to filling the existing holes. And we can see there, that is the mineral core inside that old door. Not going to do a very good job of stopping the fire if that fire gets in there. Glazing and glass kit. Glass beads are intact and securely fastened. Why? Why do we need to do that? Well, if you have inappropriate or damaged glass, it could allow the fire to pass through the opening. So prior to about 2005, we really didn't have labeled glazing. We just simply used wire glass. So today we do have labeled glazing. So if you're replacing old wire glass, you'd want to upgrade it to the current labeled glass. Why do we need to inspect it? Well, if the glass kit was installed incorrectly, it can cause problems, and somebody may have come along and added the window to the door after the door was already installed. That would not be a legal modification to the door, and you must also follow the door manufacturer's requirements for size based on the rating of the door. So there's an example of Firelight Plus. That's a product made by Nemostat. It's not our company, but it gives you good information. It has a registry number. It tells us what the time rating is, so that's 3-hour rated. It's category 2, which is typical fire glass. We look down at the bottom, we see 2 different labels. One is Safe Wire by Nemostat, so that's a way that you can use wire glass, but it has a special coating on it to prevent you from punching through. And then there are letters on there, D-NT-H. D means that glass is rated to be used in a fire-rated door. NT means that it cannot be used in a temperature-rise door. And temperature-rise doors are typically found in stairwells. They're designed to protect somebody from being exposed to extreme heat if they're waiting to be rescued on a stairway landing. So we would have a temperature rating of 30-minute 250, 30-minute 450, or 30-minute 650. And that temperature number is the amount that the door cannot increase in temperature in a 30-minute time period. And then the H would indicate that the glass has passed a hose stream test, which is part of how we go through getting ratings for doors and hardware. They are baked in an oven for 3 hours, they're pulled out, and then they hose them down with cold water. So the glass has to be able to stand up to that hose stream test. So here's an example of a door that I found when I was at a small college in, I believe it was Raleigh, North Carolina. And you can see when we look at the close-up there that the glass is actually shifted inside that kit. That may be an indication that it wasn't installed properly, because a hollow metal door has to have a channel inside that opening to keep everything in place. It looks to me like maybe they left that channel out, and through door slamming and things like that, the glass is actually shifted over a little bit. Would not do much to protect the building if the fire was on that side of the door trying to get through. And here's why wire glass is never a good idea anymore. Although it's all we had at one time, now it is not a good choice. If you punch through that glass, the wire in there will just absolutely shred you. I know, for instance, California, Oregon, and Washington State have all outlawed wire glass. So if you live in one of those 3 states, you're supposed to remove that as quickly as possible and replace it with the appropriate fire-rated glazing. Door, frame, and hardware are in proper working order. Why? Well, what do we know about fire doors? They must be self-closing and self-latching, and that is to prevent the spread of fire and smoke. We're going to inspect for this because, and we'll see these 3 same reasons many more times as we go through this list of 13. So over time, doors get out of alignment, they get damaged, or people just flat out abuse them. Hardware wears out. I mean, I'm in buildings where fire doors are 30, 40, even 50 years old. Sometimes you have to replace that hardware. And unfortunately, with the budget restrictions that the maintenance department has put upon them, they tend to fall behind in maintenance because money gets pulled to do other things in the building. So here's an example of a stairwell door. Most of my pictures come from hotels, probably because that's where I spend a good portion of my life, but also we see lack of maintenance, poor installation procedures. It's very common to find fire door violations in a hotel. Well, what did I find wrong with this door? Well, look close. There's an oil streak going down the door. So that door closer has leaked. And once the hydraulic fluid comes out of the door, air goes in to replace it. Now that door is not going to be able to be adjusted properly, and at some point in time could actually fail to close the door, and it might be at that moment where it really needs to when there's a fire in the building. If you see a leaking closer, replace it, even if it's not a fire-rated door. This was another hotel. This happened to be in Ottawa, Canada. So I was staying in there, and I usually walk down the steps in the morning to get my coffee. And I noticed this door, and they had originally hung it on 3 hinges, which are still there, but then they came along and added pieces of a continuous hinge. They took a standard continuous hinge and cut it in 2 pieces to add support to the door. Not sure why they did that, but that is not a legal modification to that door. So probably they were trying to fix something that was not working correctly. And yet another hotel. This was in Roanoke, Virginia. The door here goes into the maid's storage area where they keep linens and cleaning supplies. And as typical with a hotel lock that uses some sort of a card access, there's no key override on those. And when they break, you've got to figure out some way to get into the room. So in this case, they used a pry bar of some sort and pried their way in to the closet. Then they took the lock off and never bothered to replace it. Again, this is a fire-rated door. It must be self-closing and self-latching every time. No missing or broken parts. Why is that important? Well, if you're missing parts, it may not function like it's supposed to. So we want to make sure that all the pieces and parts are there. Something as simple as the end cap missing off an exit device is critical because somebody can start putting things inside that device. It could cause the device to malfunction and the door to not latch, or even worse, somebody couldn't get through the door. So we're going to inspect because the same three reasons we saw before. Doors get out of alignment, they get damaged by use or abuse, hardware wears out, owners fall behind on maintenance. So again, another hotel. This is in Mount Kisco, New York. I was there to do training in this particular room, and as you can see, it was Christmas time. So we've got the Christmas tree partially blocking the exit. But what I noticed is that there's no bottom rod on that Von Duprin exit device. Well, you might say to yourself, well, Von Duprin says that's okay. We do in certain circumstances. This particular device was manufactured prior to Von Duprin's approval for installing less bottom rod devices. In this particular hotel, they decided to pull the bottom rod off because it probably had been abused, damaged, so they just got rid of it because we said it would be okay to do that. Well, what we said was, if the door manufacturer will approve removing the bottom rod, then you can do that providing you follow all the steps. So step one would be door manufacturer approval. Step two would be to buy the retrofit kit. The retrofit kit includes a fusible link pin that's going to shoot from one leaf into the other. It's in the bottom 12 inches or so of the door, depending on where the door manufacturer tells you to put it. And when it gets to a certain temperature, that pin will fire into a hole that's in the other door leaf and keep those doors from warping out if the fire happens to be in that room. So what I noticed on that door was, if you stood outside and yanked on it, you could pop it open. One of the things that you have to do when you convert to less bottom rod is change out the top strike to the 499F, and it's an interlocking two-piece strike. They did not do that on that door. And they also did not disassemble the device to see if the spring under the push bar, the part you push on, if it is strong enough. We put stronger springs in the devices that didn't have the bottom rod on there because the bottom rod gave it gravitational pull, which then forced that top rod to go to a fully deadlocked position. They didn't do that on this door. In fact, they shimmed the strike down thinking that would solve the problem, and it didn't. Another hotel, this is out by Los Angeles International Airport. I spent the night there before I took a 6 a.m. flight home. And I noticed this meeting room door was propped open with a rubber wedge, which is a no-no. And at some point in time, they put that rod guard, latch guard assembly on the door to protect the bottom rod and bottom latch. But then at some point, they just removed the bottom rod and bottom latch. So again, that's an indication that that door was supposed to have both top and bottom rods. They didn't add the auxiliary fire pin or change out the top strike. So that would not be a legal conversion to less bottom rod. All right, look closely at this. It's a pair of strikes. So that tells us we've got vertical rod exit devices, and we're looking up. What do you think is missing from that? Well, if you notice, there's a straight line drawn through, so they knew where to center that strike. There's a hole there. Oh wait, that's the problem. There's a hole there. That hole is supposed to be filled with a screw to lock it in place once you get it set where it's supposed to be. That is a requirement on that strike. So here we have a picture of an LCN door closer that's naked. Somebody took the cover off of it. Is it required to have a cover on your door closer on a fire door? Well, I was uncertain, so I went to the one person I knew that could answer the question, Lori Green at idighardware.com. And her opinion was that as long as the door closes like it's supposed to, the cover is not part of that function. And it doesn't say anywhere in the codes where we have to put the cover on if it came with a cover. So the answer is no. And she did just recently write another quick article on that. So if you look at idighardware.com, type in the search engine up there, closer cover, you'll find her most recent article on that. Although if I was inspecting this, I would certainly make a note to the owner of the building that he has naked closers and he should buy them some new covers. Door clearances are within allowable limits. Why is that important? Well, gaps that are too large may allow the fire to pass through the opening. If the gap is too tight, the door may not close and latch. Why are we going to inspect for this? Well, doors become misaligned. You see it everywhere. If you look at a door and it used to be perfectly straight up and down, and now it's leaning slightly, well, if you have a pair of doors, especially, and both of them lean slightly, you could be rubbing at the top. So what are the clearances? Sides and top of hollow metal doors, 1/8 inch plus or minus a 1/16 of an inch. Bottom, maximum 3/4 inch undercut. Sides and top of wood doors are 1/8 inch only, no plus or minus. Again, the bottom would be 3/4 inch maximum undercut. And the gap between the pairs of doors, hollow metal, 1/8 inch plus or minus a 1/16. Wood doors, 1/8 inch only. So what is the downside to maybe those doors rubbing in the middle? With hollow metal doors, if they're too close in the middle and those doors heat up during a fire, there's a possibility that as the doors start to expand and they run out of room to expand, they will just explode out of the opening. And that would certainly be devastating if that happened. So there's a picture. I did not take this. In fact, Lori Green took this picture. And believe it or not, it's in a hotel. So there is an excessive gap there. And when she turned the light off in the room and looked out that way, I thought she stayed at that hotel that said, we'll leave the light on for you. But I didn't know they meant the hall light. That's way beyond what is acceptable for a gap on that door. In fact, that's probably so bad that the only way to fix that would be to replace it. Another hotel door, I took this, I was inside the stairwell, and I noticed the daylight shining in from that huge gap right there. So if you can imagine, that door is shifted enough to the right that it's starting to drag on the frame on the latch side, and that can prevent that door from closing if it leans too much against that latch side. Wow, what a gap there, huh? I did not take that picture, so I don't know where it was. Aside from the devices actually being installed on the wrong door, they should have been flip-flopped so the cylinder was at the top, we have nearly a 1/2 inch gap there in the middle. So that could allow smoke, gas, and even fire to pass through that door. Again, that's way too much gap. Door closer, spring hinges are operational, and the door is self-closing. Why? Well, that's the sole job of a fire door, is to close and latch, stop that fire from moving through the building. Why are we going to inspect? Well, there's the big three again. They're out of alignment, use or abuse, hardware wears out, maintenance doesn't have the money to do their job, and they fall behind. Oh, look at that, another hotel door. This was down in Virginia Beach. So they had disconnected this door closer off this fire-rated door into the meeting room, but then I noticed they actually put a thumb turn hold open on that so they could keep the door open. That would not be legal on a fire door. So in addition to reconnecting the parallel arm bracket, we need to get rid of the arm that has that hold open on it. But it's just strictly an arm that will allow the door closer to do its job. I did not take this picture. I'm not sure where it was, but we can see clearly that it is a labeled door. There's a label right below the top hinge. We also noticed that the top hinge is pulling out of the door. Why in the world did that happen? Well, look at the closer arm. The closer arm should be on the other side of that dead stop piece that sticks down. At LCN, we call that cush. I'm not sure what that brand of closer calls it, but what they did was unscrewed that, kick that closer arm to the other side and put it back in. Now the door will not close, And when somebody actually did try and close it, they almost yanked the top hinge completely out. And there's a fire-rated door that has a perfectly good closer on it, but somebody decided to put a rubber wedge in down at the bottom. Very common to see those in schools, office buildings, not so much in hospitals. Hospitals do a pretty good job of policing that. It's not uncommon for a teacher to have her husband come in on the weekend and screw a kick-down doorstop to her door so she can leave it open. If they're fire-rated doors, you cannot do that. Coordinator ensures the door leaves closed in proper sequence. So if you have pairs of doors and one door has to close before the other, we use something called a coordinator. Why is that important? Because they must close and latch in the proper order so they can do their job. We're going to inspect because, again, the same big three. Doors go out of alignment, get damaged, hardware wears out, owners fall behind in maintenance. So here's an example of two gravity coordinators. So we see in the top picture that rubber wheel is leaning against the door. When the other door hits the cam that's hanging down, it will drive that wheel up the door so the door is closed in the proper order. We see that door that's further away has a small mechanism sticking out of the door. That's for the automatic flush bolt. So as that other door encounters that thing sticking out, it's going to shoot the automatic flush bolt into the frame, which, by the way, does not have its strike plate attached. The picture at the lower right on here is a gravity coordinator. That one is missing the little rubber wheel, so they do wear out. Some coordinators you're able to buy a new wheel and put it on there. Others you would just replace the whole coordinator. Not a big fan of gravity coordinators. I much prefer the soffit mounted coordinator when it is installed correctly. So we see at the bottom, the coordinator is the larger of the two pieces. On the left, it has a mechanism that is locked in place. So if the active door gets there first, it will pause when it hits that mechanism. The inactive door will do its job and close and hit the trigger towards the right of the middle. When it hits that piece, it releases the mechanism over on the left and the door is closed in the proper order. However, you do not install it like the picture you see there at the top. So the soffit mounted coordinator goes on the soffit. Then if you're using a parallel arm bracket, you use a special block to attach it to the frame. It's called a mounting block, abbreviated MB for mounting block. Door is self-latching in the closed position. Why? Fire doors have to close and latch. That's their only job. Stop the spread of fire and smoke. We're going to inspect, again, the big three: out of alignment, damaged by use or abuse, hardware wears out, owners fall behind in maintenance. So another hotel, this was in San Antonio. There were several doors in this hotel on the stairwells coming down where the locks had been on there for such a long time that the springs inside the lock were just weak and they would not bring that lever back up, which kept the latch bolt in a mostly retracted position. So those doors just barely latch. One of them didn't latch at all. I pointed this out to the maintenance man because I think I owe it to him, since I know what's supposed to happen here, to tell him where his doors don't meet code. Sometimes they thank me, other times they think I'm crazy. This was a meeting room at a hotel in Brainerd, Minnesota, I believe. Exit devices, top and bottom rod. Something happened to the one on the left, so now this door will not latch properly without that bottom rod. And we also see that they've added kick-down door stops, which would not be legal on that opening. This was at a hotel in Tampa, Florida. The lounge was right adjacent to this door, so patrons that were there and wanted to have a cigarette needed to go outside, and this was the closest door to get them outside. However, once they went through this door and it closed and latched, it was locked from the other side. So rather than figuring out a way to unlock the door, they just simply removed the strike, made it a push-pull door, which will not work In case of a fire, that door will not stay latched. Opening is not equipped with auxiliary hardware items which interfere with the operation. Why? Again, fire doors have to close and latch. We're going to inspect because people don't understand what I know about hardware, possibly what you know about hardware, so they do things to make openings more convenient for them, so they don't have to carry their key with them all the time. They want it to be push-pull when it needs to be secured, so they will add things to the doors. For instance, that kick-down door stop. Again, another hotel. They want to keep that door open because it's got a closer on it, rather than doing it the correct way, which would be to use a magnet attached to the wall in the door that's tied to the fire alarm. That is absolutely the correct way to do it. They just used a kick-down door stop. This is a popular item that we're seeing in schools now. In fact, I happen to have one. A school maintenance man gave me one. It's made by a company that thinks this is a great idea. In fact, they're called Lockdown Magnet Company. And they give you directions on here. Place magnet over strike plate on metal door frame. Put door in locked position, close door. Then come and go freely. When lockdown occurs, open door slightly, remove lockdown magnet and close door. Door is already locked. I like the part about keeping the door locked, but I don't like the part about it not being self-latching. All it takes is for somebody to be in a panic situation. Maybe the fire alarm went off. Maybe the fire was in this classroom. And they quickly exit the room and somebody forgets to pull that magnet off. As that fire builds in the classroom, it's going to expand the gas, which is going to blow the door open and then allow the fire to go through the school. Not a good idea. Don't know where this picture was taken, but wow, that's pretty ingenious. There's a gazillion of these bags floating through the air in most major cities from people not disposing of them properly. So why not put them to good use? Well, that is absolutely not the right way to do that. Again, a mag holder at the top of the door would work wonders to keep that door where it needs to be. No field modifications have been performed that void the label. Why? Well, people do things to doors that have not been tested. So whatever you see on a door and a frame when it's newly installed, hopefully is what had been tested with that door and frame originally. When people come along and start making their own modifications and they haven't been trained on how to do it properly or even what's allowed to be done, then they can violate the label or void the label on that door. So we're going to inspect because, again, people do things and they're not aware of what is legal or not legal. So this is a double egress frame, and apparently when that frame was shipped to the field, the strikes were in a slightly wrong location, and somebody had to come back later and modify that in the field. Once that door and frame get to the field, those modifications cannot be done in the field, except if you have a certified person doing it and they pay the UL guide to watch them do that, and then he can apply a new label stating that he observed the work and it was within the rules and regulations, and this would now be considered a labeled opening. But just to take it upon yourself to do that because they were off slightly, not permitted by the code. Not sure where this picture was taken, but it's pretty obvious the door and frame had been weakened at some point, so they thought by adding steel to it, it would make it stronger. Chances are it does, but it is not a legal modification. The door and the frame were not tested with those items on there. And you can pretty much answer any question that somebody has about, can I do this to a fire door? And the answer always comes down to, was it tested that way? If the answer is no, then you can't do it. We see zip ties used a lot on exit devices. Not sure why they didn't use the dogging, but if it's a fire-rated door, then there is no dogging on there, so they did what they thought would work the best. Or if you don't have zip ties, Velcro works pretty well too. So, and we see a lot of people trying to figure out how to hold fire-rated exit devices in a dogged position or unlatched position. And to do that, if it's fire rated, The only legal way to do it is to use electricity. And you tie the power supply to the fire alarm goes off, latches re-extend instantly, and you're completely code compliant. Doing it any other way is a violation of the code. I wish I knew what happened on this opening. I've never found out who took this picture so I could ask them, but we see all kinds of holes in the frame. We see up there rib nuts that were holding hardware on it sometime. That hardware is now gone. It's not being used. The holes are still there. I don't know what happened to the door, although I do see looks like they have a closer. They filled 2 of the holes with steel screws, which is a correct way to fill holes. It's kind of ugly in a wood door, but that is the way to do it. Leaving them unfilled is not the correct way to do it. The steel fasteners, material like the door, if it's a hollow metal door or frame, using Bondo as your filling agent is not the correct way to do it. Gasketing and edge seals, where required, are present, continuous, and of the proper type for a fire door. Why is that important? Well, inappropriate or damaged gasketing could allow the smoke and gases to pass through the opening. Why we're going to inspect it? Because gasketing has to be installed and maintained correctly. So in NFPA 80, it doesn't tell us we have to use gasketing on fire-rated doors. We leave that to the manufacturer of the door and frame. If they require it, they will give you the information on how to do that. Now, what I see happen often, especially in hotels, is the local fire marshal will come in and he'll tell them, you need to put gasketing around the guest room doors, even though it wasn't required by the door and frame manufacturer. It's his right to ask for that. But my concern is the maintenance person who's going to perform that task will not buy the appropriate gasketing. So if it's a fire-rated door and frame, the gasketing has to be listed for use on a fire-rated door. And that costs a lot more than the stuff he's going to go to Home Depot and buy. He probably isn't going to clean the frame properly before he sticks it on there. So the chances of that gasketing lasting long term are not real good. So there's a fire-rated door held open illegally by the trash can. And we see that there's some gasketing on the frame. And look down at the bottom. We see it's already starting to pull off. So when it is in that condition, it could, depending on where it is on the frame, keep that door from latching properly. I see that all the time in the hotels. They put door bottoms on that don't work properly, and they keep the door from latching all the way, and you have to slam the door. I would rather have no gasketing at all than to see gasketing installed incorrectly and not approved gasketing. So here's an illustration of gasketing that we sell through our company, Zero. There's different types. These are the stick-on types. Again, clean the frame properly before you put it on there. Follow the directions. It should last a good long time. Signage on door covers less than 5% of door face and is not attached with mechanical fasteners. Why is that important? Items on the face of the door may change the rate at which the door fails. So we're inspecting because people aren't aware of that. Any school that you go into around holiday time, oftentimes you'll see Christmas decorations, Thanksgiving decorations stuck to the door. That is not permissible. I will tell you that it does drive the fire department crazy when they see that. So how much sign can you have on a door? By the way, number 13 is the other item that they added in 2013. So they added 1 and 13. So if I have a 3-foot wide, 7-foot tall door, that's 36 by 84 inches, 3,024 square inches. 5% of that would be 151.2. So roughly we could have a 12 by 12.5 inch sign, and we could not use mechanical fasteners. So no screws, no nails. It has to use an adhesive. You know, we want that adhesive to loosen up and fall off. Let that sign fall off the door in case that door is in a fire. There's an example of something we may see in a school around holiday time. That door could fail prematurely in a fire because of all that stuff that's been added to it and around it. There's a sign screwed to the door, so that would not be legal. It does appear to be a little bit larger than the 12 by 12 and a half. Again, we're exceeding that 5% of the surface area. Not sure what that sticker is on there. Looks like an American flag. You might be curious about the hinges that we see over there on the left. I'm pretty sure this door was installed prior to about 1975. In that time, we did not have the style technology that would allow you to attach the hinges to the edge of the door if the door had mineral core in it. So we used what's known as a half surface hinge. So that hinge is mortised into the frame and surface applied to the door and through bolted. That's what keeps it in the opening. All right, how are you going to do your inspections? Well, there's many ways that you can record your deficiencies. One would be a checklist. I would highly recommend, if you're looking for a list like this, go to idighardware.com, and in that little search box up at the top, type in inspection checklist, click the magnifying glass. It'll take you to where you can download this. This is the way that you could do it using a pencil and paper. If I were doing fire door inspections, I'd want to have software to do that with. And there are many programs out there that you can do that with. Just look it up on the internet, fire door inspection software. It will take you to several sites where you can get free samples, try it out. One gentleman will give you a 30-day trial of it before you have to lock it in and say you want it or don't want it. So there's up close what it looks like. So door does not swing freely. If it doesn't, then you put a check mark in there. So that's one way to do it. When you're done, then you would provide this list to the owner, or if you work for the owner, you would give that to your boss. You do not have to be certified to do fire door inspections. You just simply have to have some experience in the field. So taking any courses that are offered by IFDIA, International Fire Door Inspection Association, is one, or the Door and Hardware Institute would be another. They have a certification program as well. Any one of those groups could help you get certified if you would like to be certified, although at this time it is not a requirement. So if you need help, our website is allegion.com/US. Look under the training tab. You'll find that video, Anatomy of a Fire Door, as well as many other videos that can help you do your job on a day-to-day basis. We have online courses at that address. And again, Lori Green's website, idighardware.com. And you can always call customer care, 877-671-7011. You do not have to be a direct buying customer of Allegion. You can be an architect. You can be a maintenance man standing on a ladder trying to figure out how to fine-tune that automatic operator, but you're stuck, and they'll walk you through it while you're right there at the door. So there are good people out there on our helpline. I'd like to thank you for your participation today, and look for other videos online from Allegion, and I'll be back later with some more. Thank you very much.